Wilson and Harold Schechter and David Everett offer differing views. In Killers Among Us, the Wilsons distinguished between the sexual versus the materialistic. We are once again confronting the problem of the dividing line between the serial killer, whose motive is rape, and the mass murderer, who kills for gain. The Wilsons were very thorough in their presentations of serial killers, but their distinction was too limiting. The rape motive-only definition excludes the likes of Petiot, Beck and Fernandez, and Hoch, all of whom are most often included in the serial killer rosters. In the A to Z encyclopedia, Schechter and Everett present a more acceptable distinction between the mass murderer and serial killer, accenting the mindset and actions of the individual. The mass murderer suddenly goes completely berserk, slaughtering a large number of random victims. On the other hand, the serial killer is a planner, the hunter of humans. Schechter and Everett's definition can be further refined. A mass murderer, political or not, does not have to be, as they state, suddenly completely berserk. Neither does there need to be a reason for the victims to be murdered suddenly, for example, contract killings. The serial killer does plan, most often at different locations. In 1998, Stephen A. Egger, The Killers Among Us, An Examination of Serial Murder and Its Investigation, widened the definition to those committing a second murder. He did challenge, however, views that include material gain as motive. In his definition, there is generally no prior relationship between victim and attacker. Generally, the murderer seeks power or dominance over his victims, and victims may have symbolic value for the murderer, and/or are perceived to be prestigeless and in most instances are unable to defend themselves or alert others to their plight. In defining serial killer, we need to know how many murders it takes for someone to qualify. According to the criterion of the FBI-created National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crimes, there must be at least 4 victims for someone to be considered either a mass murderer or a serial killer. The criterion was determined at a 2005 symposium of the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crimes. In Thrill Killers, 1986, Clifford L. Leindecker argues there is no fixed number required. What he stresses, and what can be added to the definition of serial killers, is the continuation of their operations. They continue their crimes until imprisonment or death, or, if they are never caught, the cessation of their murder sprees may simply mean they abandoned their criminal careers. One of the earliest students of serial killers was William Bolitho in 1926, who was intrigued by the phenomenon of Germany's Fritz Haarmann. Bolitho included 4 other serial killers and categorized them as murderers for profit. He concluded that each is unique with his black literature, yet he also concluded that in many ways the serial killer is much like the ordinary individual. These are men, certainly not deranged automatons that we will observe, the worst men, not madmen, even on the slightest acquaintance, nastily like ourselves. They do not despise in their technique of life any of the anodynes that we of the virtue use against poverty, loneliness, hunger, the contempt of our fellows, or predatory competition. They very commonly construct for themselves life romance, a personal myth, in which they are the maltreated hero, which secret is the key of their life. In such comforting daydreams, many an honest man has drugged himself against despair. Bolitho goes beyond these murderers for profit to place serial killers in 3 categories that combine motivation and upbringing: the biological killer, whose crimes are triggered by a physical defect or malady or injury; the psychologically demented killer, whose problems are related to a traumatic childhood; and the sociological or made-by-society killer, who feels society has cheated him and owes him something. More contemporary serial killer scholars have analyzed serial killers in terms of their fields of operations, their relationships to their victims, and the reasons for their crimes. In Michael Newton's Hunting Humans, 1990, the author writes of the locale of these crimes: territorial, staking out of a specific region; nomadic, roaming widely in search of prey; and stationary, setting traps in the killer's own homes or places of employment. Brian Lane and Wilford Gregg, the editors of The Encyclopedia of Serial Killers, approach the study of serial killers as an analysis of those who have separate and distinct characteristics.